Moses has this amazing phenomenon upon his face. It says his face shone. This is following his rewarded experience of being able to behold the glory of God. Exodus 34, 29 and through 35, it gives us an example of this amazing phenomenon where the light of God's very own being was impressed upon the face of Moses and consequently reflected from his mortal body. We know from 1 John that God is what? God is light. And in him there is no darkness at all. Paul would tell Timothy in one of his epistles that God dwells in unapproachable light.
Bless you, Lord. Preach it, son.
Looking at verse 30, I want us to briefly just gather a few insights from this passage on the effects that reflecting God's glory have upon people. So when Aaron and all the sons of Israel saw Moses, verse 30, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him. The glory of God, when it is reflected from mankind, it provokes fear. This is a very shocking experience, a shocking observation by the children of Israel. They are so used to seeing the cloud of Shekinah glory hover above Mount Sinai and direct them throughout the wilderness and through the Exodus, that they would by no means have expected that glory to be impressed upon a human being and thus reflected from them. So what Moses is revealing to them, what God is revealing to them is that glory, that as Romans would tell us, that they exchanged for an image, for an idol. That very glory of God can now be impressed and reflected from mankind. That glory that was hovering above Mount Sinai, veiled in the cloud. And thus Moses brings these children into miraculous closeness to the essence of God's being. Look at verse 31. Then Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the rulers in the congregation returned to him, and Moses spoke to them. Afterward, all the sons of Israel came near. You see also that it is this glory on Moses' face that has humbled the children of Israel. It has inspired obedience. He called to them, and they returned to him. Afterward, all the sons of Israel came near, and he commanded them to do everything that the Lord had spoke to him on Mount Sinai. And when Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil over his face. Well, now that's interesting. And it raises a very important question. In fact, it raises a couple important questions. Why does Moses veil his face? Paul would tell us in 2 Corinthians, and we'll turn there later, that we are not like Moses, who used to have to put a veil over his face so that the sons of Israel would not look intently at the end of what was fading. So Paul sheds light on this passage and this experience and gives us detail that we don't have here in Exodus chapter 34, telling us that this glory that was upon Moses' face faded, and that Moses did not want the sons of Israel to see the end, the termination of that glory, so he veiled his face. But then there's a problem, because in verse 29, at the end of verse 29, it says that Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone. So the first question is, how does Moses learn that his face is shining? Verse 29 tells, he has to know by verse 33 because he put a veil over his face, and Paul tells us that Moses put the veil over his face in 2 Corinthians so that they would not see the end of the glory. So at some point, Moses learns that his face is shining, that God's glory is being reflected from his face. So how does he come to know that? Moses learns that the glory of God is reflecting from his face because of the way people reacted to him.
That's good.
Point. One of the first ways and primary ways you learn whether or not you have been changed from being in God's presence, beholding his glory, is by the way people react to you, how they approach you, how they respond to your words, to your advice. But then also it says, Paul says in 2 Corinthians, and we'll turn there later, that the glory faded. And Moses did not want them to see the end of it. So he put a veil over his face. So then, Moses has to also sense a different reaction from the people as the glory faded. So we see here that Moses is amazingly changed by beholding God's glory. The glory of God has influenced him so that he now reflects this, and it really greatly contributes and supports and increases the effectiveness of his ministry to the children of Israel. Let's read the remaining verses of this text. But whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would take off the veil until he came out. And whenever he came out and spoke to the sons of Israel what he had been commanded, the sons of Israel would see that the skin of Moses' face shone. So Moses would replace the veil over his face until he went in to speak with him. There is this customary practice of Moses to go into the tent of meeting. It was also where the cloud of Shekinah glory would hover over the entrance of this tent of meeting, and Moses would speak with God. He would behold this glory of God. It would be impressed upon him, and it would consequently be reflected from him as he went out to read the old covenant to the children of Israel. And my proposition to you this morning, that more than Moses ever did as a minister of the old covenant, we may, you and I, reflect the glory of God when we embrace the Christian responsibility of sharing in God's mission to reconcile mankind to himself. How is it then that the glory of God can be reflected from this life in our mortal bodies. We have to wrestle with that in our mind. Because someone will say that I don't see Christians around here walking with shiny faces as a result of communion and fellowship and ministering to God's people, as a result of sharing the gospel. I don't see a bright light shining from the face of Billy Graham. But Paul helps us